All right, good morning, class. Welcome to another edition of History 301, America's Founding Documents. Y'all can go ahead and get your Berkin book out today. We're going to be reviewing chapters 4 and 5 specifically as we continue our focus on the Constitutional Convention this week. While you're getting there, I want to take us on a little trip first. In 1991, grainy footage showed 4 LA police officers using batons to beat a black man on the side of an interstate in LA. This became the infamous Rodney King incident. And a couple of months later, as these men were arrested, they were put on trial, they were acquitted. Even though the footage showed them beating Rodney King, the trial of 12 men acquitted them. Soon thereafter, the 1992 LA riots begun. Now, we can say that it would have been strictly a racial event between black and white. However, there was a huge context in it between black and Korean. But that's kind of beside the point, but I wanted y'all to get your mind there, because by the third day of this, Rodney King came out and he made this famous plea, and I want to quote correctly, "People, I just want to say to you, can we all get along?" I bring this story as an introduction to today's lesson because that's where I want your mind frame to go. We have this Constitutional Convention. Berkin writes in chapter 3, calls it a collection of demigods, people who are so sure of themselves. Yet this Constitutional Convention is going to show, as you've read it and as we discuss it, the question still asked, can't we all just get along? So, factions. Now, we've talked about factions in the past, groups that believe in different viewpoints. We're used to it in life. We see political parties. We see different denominations potentially within a certain faith. In high school, you experienced cliques. You had jocks. You had the nerds. Some schools more so than others. If you go back to the 50s, you may have seen in the old movies, greasers versus the jocks. The ones that combed their hair back, kind of like the movie Grease, versus the guys who wore the letterman's jacket. So factions are nothing new. And this Constitutional Convention is going to be a part of that. So as we move into the Constitutional Convention, there's really 3 questions that chapters 4 and 5 highlight. And I bring them up on the board for you. So if you want to look at the board. But the first one is, and this is quickly answered in chapter 4, did this convention have the legal right to actually introduce a new government system instead of the original design to simply recommend amendments or changes to the Articles of Confederation? Some people could view this as an act of treason to come up with this Republican style of government that they were introducing, this new Federalist style of government, or as we know, the Constitution, which was what came out of this. The second question, what should the national legislature look like? Should it be unicameral, which is what the Articles had, many states had, or should it be bicameral, which harkens back to Parliament, where you had the House of Lords and the House of Commons? You also had this concept of the split where is the voting going to be equal by states? Is it going to be by population? And this equal by states and equal by population is really where a lot of the friction point is, and it develops this whole notion of large state versus small state, breaking into factions. So when the first question's answered pretty quickly, we obviously see the result of that. I'm not going to harp too long on that, because today I want to focus on the legislative aspect on it. Because the third question that we could focus on, and Berkin really starts to hit on it on the back end of 5, but goes better into 6 with it. What should the executive look like? Who elects this person or persons? And probably the question that generated the most dissent within that question is, how much should they get paid? Should they be paid like a pauper, which means people may not want to even be a part of it because, hey, all this work, am I going to get any service money for it? Or should they get paid a lot and then they just want to keep working there? Keep on keeping on as it goes. But let's really focus on question number 2 today. Now, there's 2 primary plans that are going to come into conflict and different viewpoints on each of them. On one hand, you're going to have the Virginia plan. Now, we've covered that before, but this Virginia plan also becomes kind of this large state plan. Virginia is in favor of it. Pennsylvania. Amazingly, New York is not, even though it is a large state by population and size. New York had told its delegates it wanted to just strengthen the Articles of Confederation, nothing else. So Virginia, Pennsylvania, you could argue South Carolina was a part of this. But its primary proponents was James Madison of Virginia and Alexander Hamilton of New York. Which is funny because Hamilton wanted a stronger federal government, but the New York legislature had said no. So he's kind of out here on his own with this one. Now, one of the main parts of this Virginia plan, as you've read, is it did recommend a 3-branch system, which we have today: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch. Now, speaking of the executive, it was vague. The Virginia plan really did not highlight or define what this person or group should be composed of, what their exact duties were. What it really only focused on is it should be elected by the legislature, not by the people. The legislature, which is our primary focus, it recommended a bicameral, 2 houses. Similar to the Parliament, you had the House of Lords, you had the House of Commons. But what this wanted was proportional representation in both. The more people you had in your state, the more seats you had in here. This is the crux of the problem. The small states, which had smaller populations and with smaller land size, also had the least amount of room they felt to grow in population. They were against this proportionality. So the New Jersey plan, which was come about by William Patterson of New Jersey, recommended this idea of a unicameral legislation. He wanted to maintain the Articles of Confederation. 1 state, 1 vote. You can send 20 delegates from your state, you can send 1. They only get 1 vote. Each state is equal. By having this, that maintains the power of individual states over a collective federal government, it felt. This also plan talked about the executive. It wanted an executive board, not just 1 person. They just overthrown the king. They didn't want to have to deal with this idea of a small, consolidated point of power. So it wanted an elected board who was elected by the legislature but removable by the state governors. This shows state sovereignty and the influence of the states within the federal government, which is kind of unique because the federal government really had nothing to do with state governors. And state governors in most of their constitutions were very weak. Not like governors we're used to today, kind of modeled within their state on the presidency, their powers. At this time, governors were more of a figurehead. They did not execute a lot of authority, maybe in cases of calling out the militia. But when it came to legislative acts, most states, they were weak in it. Some, they did have some power. Now, having established these two, Luther Martin of Maryland, who really did not, in best words, he did not reflect the whole notion of what people were looking for in a delegate. He was kind of a drunk. But he was a strong states' rights supporter. And him and Patterson, completely different mind frames on most everything, the way they dressed, the way they ate, the way they talked. But they had this commonality of states' rights mentality. So that was a marriage of convenience. If you're looking on page 74, if you'll take a moment and get there, I'm going to mention something. As the weeks dragged into months, remember this convention started in May and ended in September. This wasn't a weekend get-together. The convention debated, it argued, and come dangerously close to dissolving over the fundamental question, what was the basis of representation in the legislation to be? This whole notion, is it going to be bicameral, each with proportional representation? Is it going to be unicameral, one vote per person? This was that conflict. Now, proportional representation would strengthen the idea of a strong central government. But not every state is going to support this notion. John Dickinson, who, if you remember from our review of the Declaration of Independence, the Olive Branch Petition, he's actually a member of the Constitutional Convention also. Now, he is a strong supporter of a strong national government. He has seen the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. He's been there throughout the entire process. But he also wants to maintain states' rights. And there is a large delegation of people who are going to ride this middle ground with him. They want to see the states maintain their power, but yet at the same time they want to see a stronger central government. They see the weakness in the Articles of the Confederation firsthand. And many of these disagreements that they're having over this legislature really has to do with the concept of power. Who has power? This idea of the Virginia Plan really plays into the strong nationalist-focused, more of the citizens have a focus of we the people, because more proportional representation, the people are more involved, more engaged with it. This union was supposed to be a government of the people, not of the states. On the other hand, the New Jersey Plan, state-focused. You as a citizen are a citizen of your state. The federal government is a response to all of the states. Now, eventually, this is going to come a clash. They are one side is trying to sell it to the other. There's pushback. Certain delegates arrive late. They have different state instructions, and there's this constant factionalism going on. People are disagreeing. People are leaving the convention because they felt like, hey, this is only supposed to be setting up a new Articles of Confederation amendments instead of a whole new government. Is this treason? There was a reasonable question to be asked. But one day, finally, the parties were breaking down. They could not get along. It was the weekend. They were splitting up. And John Dickinson, Quaker, pacifist, walks over to Madison and says, you see the consequences of pushing things too far. Some of the members from the small states are friends to a good national government, but we would sooner submit to a foreign power than submit to the depravity of an equality of suffrage in both branches of the legislature. Look, we want a strong government. We recognize it's great. But the problem is we cannot accept proportional representation in the two branches of this legislature. That's the deal. So Madison has got, hey, this is what's going to happen. If you do not focus on what we can do together, then this whole thing is going to end up being a waste and people are going to go home. And remember, it's Philadelphia. It is one of the hottest summers that people can remember. They're in this building together. So, one Sunday, the delegates of New Jersey, the ones that are in favor of this New Jersey plan, some from Delaware and New York get together. And one of them, Roger Sherman, puts forth this idea of what they call the Connecticut Compromise. This is not the first time he's introduced it. He introduced it earlier. It was pushed aside by the big states because at that time they looked like they were going to roll everybody over, that the small states were going to get in line. Well, the small states had rallied, as we've seen, and got some of their power back under them. And now the big states are going to get on the defensive position. Like, hey, look, we're starting to lose votes to the small states. So this Roger Sherman Great Compromise is put forth. And if we had it up here, it would be right here because it takes components of this and components of this and combines it to what we are used to today. When we talk about the Senate, each state has the same number of senators. We have 2. So here's where, while you have a bicameral, you have a House, you have a Senate. So they're still bicameral. The House, which is considered, the House of Representatives is the lower house, is proportional. This reflects where we studied Parliament, the House of Commons. Then when you come over here, they got equal representation in one of the houses, in the Senate, the upper house. Now at that time, senators, up until the 17th Amendment, were selected by the state legislatures. They were not popularly elected. So that gave the states say within the Senate. So you get this balance, and that's how it's known as the Great Compromise. The idea was this would help diffuse the power, because national legislatures could overrun and overturn a person's rights just as strongly as a king, a president, a monarch. And in some states, they really only put the power in the legislature, and people had grown to see, hey, this is also an issue. So eventually the votes are held on July 16th for this Connecticut Compromise. 5 voted yay for it. 4 voted no. Massachusetts split, and New York was absent. None of the New York delegates were there. Rhode Island had never sent delegates. So these 5 states were able to get the Connecticut Compromise through the convention, and that's how we have our first article of the Constitution to look the way it does. Now, there were some more little committees that got together and kind of tweaked some things, but these factions that rallied around this Virginia plan and these factions that rallied around the New Jersey plan, you're going to see this later when we talk about the ratification process. You're going to see how this strong nationalist government, this strong pro-constitutional convention is going to grow into a federalist party. And those who are more, hey, anti-constitution in many ways, if you're going to do it, we need a Bill of Rights, pro-states' rights, pro-state sovereignty are going to grow into this Democratic-Republican Party, not under William Patterson, but under Thomas Jefferson. But we'll cover that the next time we're in class. What questions do y'all have?